Liez asked us to respond to the opening and closing ceremonies of the 2024 Olympics. And Brett asked us, what happens if someone wins the lottery? What kind of advice would you have for them? Why Carlo sent in a question about retirement. If you have an option between $7,800 a month and free medical care for a lifetime, would you take that or would you take a lump sum of $1.5 million? We're going to talk about all three of these things right here on Wealth Talks today.
We should start with a lottery question first, because the answer to that one is easy. If someone wins the lottery and doesn't know what to do with the money, they should send it to me.
Somehow it doesn't seem that lottery winners have trouble finding things to do with the money, but they have trouble finding things to do with the money to make it last. I could think of three things that would be productive things to do with lottery money. Number one, you could make an investment, maybe start a business. Number two, you could save it, maybe buy life insurance. And number three, you could donate it to productive efforts already underway. But somehow lottery winners don't seem to have this mindset.
It's not that people don't know what to do with money. They know how to spend it. It's just that they don't know how to make it last and generate something that can be passed on and create benefit for a lot of other people.
When somebody suddenly wins the lottery, it's not like they have been disciplined or practiced in managing their money. They're just suddenly getting a huge lump sum. And that makes a big difference. It's quite different than someone who has managed their money, earned their money, and over time produced a large sum.
In fact, the people that play the lottery are not usually the ones who manage it wisely, because just the fact of buying a lottery ticket is not usually a wise financial decision.
Jesus talked about this same thing when he talked about the story of the talents and the minas in the Gospels. And it's interesting what happened. Those who produced with what had been given to them and made more were rewarded by getting what the person that was given something and didn't do anything with it. In fact, is that person who was a poor steward and didn't multiply what had been given to them, even what he had was taken away and given to the ones who had been more productive. And this is what happens often to people that win the lottery. They don't know what to do with the money, they're fearful, and it disappears.
When Brett asked us this question, he was asking about the lottery, but he said he was also thinking about someone who he knew who just gained an inheritance, a rather large inheritance. And he was wondering what that friend will do with the money. He said that the friend doesn't even seem to need the money. And this tells us that that friend is a good money manager. He has done well throughout his life, not necessarily always making the right financial decisions, but making those financial decisions right. And now he's in a position where maybe he doesn't need that money, but he's going to be able to manage it well based on the principles he already has in place. So winning the lottery or gaining an inheritance, those can be two very different things. I know a lot of times we have clients who say, well, I don't want my kids to win the lottery with my death benefit. And if they have been teaching their kids to manage money and their kids have a chance to practice managing their money before they receive that inheritance, it's not going to be like winning the lottery.
I think sometimes that inheritance are given based on a false sense of charity. People have told us, well, my two sons or my two daughters they really don't need my money, but this one child of mine really, really has a need for money. Well, why is that? They haven't learned to manage money in the first place. And when an inheritance is blessed onto someone that hasn't learned how to manage money, it's going to frizzle away because they don't know the value of taking care of money.
It becomes more like a lottery winner instead of a blessing to somebody who has already learned to manage money well.
That leads us to our next question by Carlo, who wrote this. If you had the choice between $7,800 a month and lifetime free medical versus a lump sum of $1.5 million, which would you choose? At my work, Carlo works at a hospital, we have seen people 2 nurses and a respiratory therapist die fairly recently after retiring. And some of us at my work are inclined to take the lump sum. This is a big, big question for a lot of people planning to retire at my work.
I think this question from Carlo is very similarly related to Brett's question. If someone gets a lump sum from their retirement account and they haven't learned to manage money beforehand, they could frizzle it all away very quickly. But if someone has been diligent in managing money up to the point of retirement, then a lump sum could be something that they could do very well with and make it grow.
One of the concerns that's behind this question of Carlo's, and also a concern of his coworkers, is they are seeing these friends of theirs retire and then very shortly they die. They're not just concerned about how to preserve this money during their own life. They're concerned about how is this money going to also benefit other family members or be a legacy beyond their lifetime.
This is a problem that faces a lot of people that have a pension plan, because what happens to that money if you die, it disappears. It doesn't matter how long you live, if you live 2 years or if you live 100, that money is promised. But if you only live 2 years, there's nothing else going to anybody else. And so in that case, it may be beneficial for someone to look at an annuity where instead of letting the pension plan annuitize it, and then it all disappears, that you take the lump sum and you roll it into an annuity so you don't get taxed on it all up front. And then you're getting a guaranteed for as long as you live, and you can put what's called a certain period on there so that if you die in a couple of years after you take your retirement, then someone else, your beneficiaries, will continue to get that money until it's all paid out.
And what we would recommend would also be very individual to each person's situation, because one of the things that wasn't mentioned here about these 2 nurses and the respiratory therapist that died rather quickly is their age. Their age wasn't even referenced, so we don't know how old these people were. In fact, it doesn't even seem to be a concern about how old they were when this question is addressed, or they would have mentioned that. So our answer, our response is going to be different based on each situation. How old the person is going to be one consideration, but also the values that that person has and what they want to accomplish and leave when they're gone.
If we look at the Social Security life expectancy, I'm 33 years old right now, so my life expectancy is another 47 years till I'm about 82. If we look at the same life expectancy for a 50-year-old, 50-year-old has a life expectancy of about 32 more years until the time they're about 82. A 67-year-old has a life expectancy of about 17 years until the time they're 84, by the time they have attained age 67.
And I guess that's because if you've lived at least to 67, then you have a greater chance of living a little longer.
What this tells us is that these types of questions have to be individualized. How old is the person? What is their health? What's available that's different than just taking the PERS pension or the company pension and living happily ever after for 2 years or for 50 years? We don't know. And so those questions all have to be personalized. But let's say that someone is 67, full retirement age for someone born, 1960 and previously. That person could take the $1.5 million and get $9,600 a month instead of $7,800 if they rolled that retirement pension plan into an annuity. That's $1,800 difference. They could buy a life insurance policy that would replace that income if they died within a few years, giving their beneficiaries and their loved ones something to have to continue on with.
So there are a few advantages to that. Number one, they're not depending on the company pension anymore, or the state pension, depending on what type of pension program it is. Many pension programs are underfunded, so this might be a wise decision if they're thinking long term, because typically, if you take an annuity from a pension plan, you want to live a long time. But if the pension fund itself isn't well funded, what are the problems that could arise further down the road. I remember you talking about somebody that you knew years ago who had retired and then their pension was cut years later, or some of the healthcare benefits that were associated with that.
Yeah, George had worked for GM all of his life. He was very high up there. He was what they called an efficiency expert. He was actually the person that put together the Toyota Chevrolet factory in Northern California, the efficiency part of that plant. When he retired, his healthcare benefits were reduced, even though they had been guaranteed for life, and his income was reduced. And the result of that was his wife died because she needed that care and they didn't have the funds to do it.
That's sad.
And then it also depends on what you value. So the health care that comes with this $7,800 a month, it might not be the health care that you want. I have a little different idea of what I like for healthcare, not the mainstream, not necessarily what this particular option would allow. So my values are different. So that's going to affect the decision that I would make in this particular situation.
Values have a lot to do with how we manage money. And oftentimes people that aren't able to manage money, their values are the issue that keeps them from being able to make that money multiply or even to keep it long enough for it to really benefit themselves.
So Carlo, thank you for bringing this question, and we would be happy to talk with you or your coworkers when you're considering options for retirement to help you evaluate this so you have a better idea of what decision you should make.
Another thing that was raised in Carlo's question was, what if we took part of the money and invested it? Wouldn't it double in a few years? And here we have to look at the rule of 72. The rule of 72 says you take the interest rate and you divide it into 72, and that's how many years it will take to double your money. It doesn't matter how much it is. That's pretty accurate up to about an 8% rate of return, and after that it gets a little bit shaky. But, if we take, 7 into 72, that's more than 10 years that it's going to take to double your money. If it's 5%, it's going to take longer. If it's 6%, it's going to take longer. So it's the rule of 72 is a really good rough way to figure how long it would take to double money.
And that's if the investment performs as you anticipate.
That's correct.
We're going to take a break now. When we get back, we're going to talk about the opening and closing ceremonies of the Olympics.
Policy design is critical to having cash value early in your policy and having it grow quickly. Regular whole life insurance starts out with little to no cash value and a relatively high death benefit. But Nelson Nash, the founder of the infinite banking concept, said, "Your need for cash during your life is greater than your need for death benefit." That's true. So if you design the policy differently with a paid-up additions rider, you can bring that cash value up sooner and cause it to grow better and reduce the death benefit a little bit. This is good because your need for cash during your life is greater than your need for death benefit. Over the years, the cash value and the death benefit are going to grow in a well-designed policy like this until your death benefit is actually higher than it would be in a regular whole life insurance towards the end of your life, which statistically is when you're most likely to need it. That is a win all the way around, and that's the way we write policies here at McPhee Insurance. If you want a well-designed policy that's designed to have cash value early and have its cash value grow quickly, there's two ways you can get it. You can get it from us here at McPhee Insurance. That's the way we write policies. Or if you have an insurance agent you know, like, and trust already, then you can use our resources that we publish on McPheeInsurance.com and on YouTube, McPhee Insurance, to learn how to read a whole life insurance illustration, how a good policy should be designed, and you can use that information along with the agent you know, like, and trust to write a policy that will work for you. And once it is all set up and ready to go and you're ready to purchase the policy, if you want to double check it, you can use our insurance review service and we'll let you know if it's a good policy or not. It's well worth the $75 to have that peace of mind. If you want good life insurance or you want your life insurance reviewed, you can contact us by phone at 702-660-7000 or by email. Our email is team@mcpheeinsurance.com.
So we were talking over the break, and we decided that we would take the 1.5 million, but we have to take it in a very strategic manner. If we just take the lump sum as, oh, write me a check for 1.5 million, we're going to be hit with some serious taxes. We're going to lose about $480,000 of it right off the bat. So what we would do is we would take the lump sum, but we would roll it into an annuity, an IRA annuity, so that the taxes don't hit us right at first. And then that $9,600 a month that we get from the new annuity, we could take part of that and invest it instead of it just being locked up in a PERS account or some pension plan where we can't touch it.
Another way to look at this is we can consider a time value of money projection. Time value of money looks at time, interest, present value, payment or cash flow, and the future value. And you can do projections based on this. Let's say if we put the $1.5 billion to work, earning 6%, and of course this doesn't consider the taxes if you did take that lump sum, but if you took $7,800 a month out of that, then you'd still have about $1.2 million, a little bit less than that by the time 30 years had rolled by. But that doesn't take into account the cost of healthcare. Because if you have to buy a Medicare Part B and maybe a Medicare supplement plan, in addition to that, that's an extra $312 a month, roughly, depending on where you are in the country. So if you add that to the $7,800 that you're taking out, and let's say your investments were up and down a little bit, and maybe they only earned 5%, well, now you're out of money in 30 years. So even though it seems like a big jump from $1.2 million down to nothing in 30 years, there's a risk that you're taking with that if you're going to be investing that money and buying your own healthcare.
You might be thinking, boy, how do I keep track of all this stuff? You don't have to. That's what we're here for, to help you to walk through these and personalize what you need to do with your pension plan or retirement account funds.
All right, so now, like I promised, we are going to talk about the opening and closing ceremonies at the Olympics.
I couldn't help but think when Liaz asked this question of a book I've been reading called Shepherds for Sale. It's a new book, and it talks about how evil is pervading the Christian church, especially here in America. That's not anything new. If we look at the pre-Christian era, evil people persecuted people that had high morals. They mocked them, they killed them, they tortured them. In the Dark Ages, there were evil people that ran after people that had high morals doing the same thing. They mocked them, they killed them, they persecuted them, and they tortured them. And today, in the post-Christian era, we're seeing the same thing start to happen. There are more Christians persecuted today in the world than any other religious sect. There are more Christians mocked. I mean, it's open territory for any comedian or anybody on the street to mock Christianity. And that's what we saw during the opening and closing ceremonies of the Olympics. Now, why is that important? It was during the Great Awakening that people began to realize that, wait a second, we're all created equal in the sight of God. We have the right to self-governance, and we have the right to the pursuit of happiness or property. And it was those foundations that came from the Bible teachings in the Great Awakening that created an uprising of the middle class, of free trade and commerce, and a cash economy. And when we see this kind of mocking and a retrograde of morals, we know that the middle class is going to suffer, the economy is going to suffer, and that individual liberties are going to be taken away.
So, Tom, here you are talking about the opening and closing ceremonies of the Olympics. Did you watch those ceremonies?
I didn't. I saw a couple of still pictures on social media, and it was not something that I even wanted to view. And it's really sad to me that it happens at an event where we're celebrating people who have disciplined themselves and worked hard and diligent to perform their very best, and then we get this mockery on either end of that. It's really a shame, and it just shows where our society is that we tolerate that.
Well, I didn't watch those ceremonies either because same thing. I saw some pictures, I heard people's comments, and I realized this is not even something I want to look at. And, that's been true with other things throughout life. People talk about certain parties or drug experiences, and I don't have to participate in that. I can know of it, but I do not want that to be a part of my life. I reject it. And how we do anything is how we do everything. So it wasn't surprising to me that you didn't care to watch those ceremonies. And the same thing kind of happens in the financial world too. People get excited about certain investments and they think, oh, I'm going to go after this. It's kind of a shiny object. Everyone is doing it. But we have to look at those things and think, is this part of my values? Is this what I want to participate in? And we can make a choice, not from having to have that very own experience, but from observing other people's results and making decisions based on our values.
So why are we talking about morals and values here? It's because it is the moral values that came from the Bible that allowed the middle class to rise, that allowed our economy to be the greatest economy in the world, that allowed people to have individual freedom, and allowed us to have self-governance. And it's those things that we need to understand, which haven't been taught in our schools and neglected in the upraising of children, so that today people are confused and they're listening to the evil and thinking that that's freedom, when actually it's leading to the paganism of the past that entrapped people, eliminated the middle class. And it's so important that we teach these values, and that's why we wrote the book, A Biblical Guide to Personal Finance.
Biblical Guide to Personal Finance. We talk about the references in the Bible and how to apply those to our lives today.
It's all about wealth. Wealth is more than money. Wealth is freedom. Wealth is the ability to self-govern. Wealth is the ability to create something of value so that everybody's economy rises. And the mocking of these traditions and these moral principles and values is just heartbreaking to see.
All of the things that you mentioned, the blessings of self-governance, the ability to create wealth, all of these things are a byproduct of honoring our Creator. And so when we stop honoring the Creator and the source of these blessings, then those blessings are taken away. And we see that with what happens on a wide scale in the economy, but really this is nothing new. What's happening in the world. It just happens in different ways at different times. We see that over and over again in the Old Testament when Israel would turn away from following the Lord. And then there would be a period of trial and hardship. They would often be enslaved to another nation. And then when they would turn back to the Lord, He would rescue them and restore them.
Part of the Great Awakening was the teaching of the Bible that says everybody has but one king, and that's God. And that was the founding principle that the Great Awakening was set upon. And it was those principles that came out of the Great Awakening that led to the American Revolution to say, we don't need another king. We already have our king in heaven. We can self-govern. And what happened after that is the economy boomed. Everything went up. I mean, commerce went up, trade went up. It was amazing what happened. And when we see good people that have moral values run our country, we see the economy rise. And when we see evil people that are in power and putting regulations and dominating us and telling us what we can do and what we can look at and what we can see and what we can say and what we can carry, the economy suffers. And these are biblical truths, and we need to make sure that we teach these truths and we live these truths, because when that happens, then the world is a better place to live in.
In summary of today's podcast with Brett's question, what does someone do if they win the lottery? Well, they will do with a large sum of money what they have done with a small amount of money. If you want to be able to handle money well, start with what you have right now. With Carlo's question of take a lump sum or the $7,800 in free healthcare, that shows us that not all decisions can be made on a spreadsheet, not even financial decisions. So your values are going to play a huge role in what you want to accomplish. And finally, the opening and closing ceremonies of the Olympics, there again, we're back to values. If this is something you want to participate in watching, that's up to you, but you don't have to accept what's going in the culture. You can reject the message is there, and choose a better life for you and for your loved ones. And that will also be reflected in your financial decisions. If you listening to this podcast have questions that you'd like to see discussed on Wealth Talks, please put them in the comments. We'll be happy to address them.
Most Americans think of slavery as something that's in our past. It was an ugly chapter in history. We fought a civil war to get rid of it, and we're glad it's gone. But there's another type of slavery, financial slavery, that's holding everyday Americans in bondage. We're going to talk about that next time right here on Wealth Talks.